in accidents and calamities by sea and by land, in great conflagration, in first tornadoes, in terrific hailstorms, in tempest, floods, cyclones, tidal waves, and earthquakes, in every place in a thousand forms, Satan exercising his power. He swept away the ripening harvest, and famine and distress follows. He imparts to the air the deadly taint, and thousand perish by pestilence. This visitation will become more frequent and disastrous. Let us pray. Father God in heaven, you are the most powerful God, omnipotent, omnipresent, and the eternal God. Lord, thank you so much again for this opportunity that we can study the sure words of prophecy. We ask again, Father, that you will pour your wisdom toward your people. Bless us, Lord. This seminar will be successful. In Jesus' name, Amen. Last night, we studied the last departure of the Shekinah's glory. This time, we will study the events that happened at the year 31 AD going to 70 AD. Or we will study the texts that are found in Matthew chapter 24 in verse 4 through verse 14. The title of our topic this evening is the historical fulfillment. Tomorrow, don't be missed, we will study the end time fulfillment of Matthew chapter 24 in verse 1 through 14. But tonight, we will study only the historical fulfillment of this passage in Matthew chapter 24 in verse 4 through verse 14. We have studied in the first night of this series of lecture that Matthew chapter 24 has a dual fulfillment. I will read to you this passage from the writings of Ellen White, the Thoughts from the Mount of Blessing, page 120, paragraph 12. It says here, the ruin of Jerusalem was a symbol of the final ruin that shall overwhelm the world. The prophecies that receive the partial fulfillment and overthrow of Jerusalem have a more direct application to the last days. We are now standing on the threshold of great and solemn events. A crisis is before us, such as the world has never witnessed. So Matthew chapter 24 has a partial fulfillment or a figure of what will happen in the last days. Last day events, page 18. The whole of the 24th chapter of Matthew is a prophecy concerning the events to precede this event, and the destruction of the Jerusalem is used to typify the last great destruction of the world by fire. Great controversy, page 25. The prophecy which he uttered was twofold in its meaning. While foreshadowing the destruction of Jerusalem, it prefigured also the terrors of the last days. Friends, folks, the events that precede from 31 AD going to 70 AD, the destruction of the Jerusalem, will be repeated with a large-scale fulfillment at the year 70 AD, the destruction of the Jerusalem, going through the second coming of Christ. But tonight, we will study this text in Matthew in the 24th chapter in verse 4 through 14. Matthew chapter 24 in verse 4 through 14. In our previous study, we have studied Matthew chapter 24 in verse 1 to 3. It's about the departure of the Shekinah's glory. Tonight, we will study Matthew chapter 24 in verse 4 through 14. I will read to you the text. In verse 4, And Jesus answered and said unto them, Take heed that no man deceived you. For many shall come in my name, saying, I am Christ, and shall deceive many. And you shall hear of wars and rumors of wars. See that you be not troubled. For all these things must come to pass, but the end is not yet. Verse 7, For nation shall rise against nation, and kingdoms against kingdom. And there shall be famines and pestilences, and earthquakes in the diverse places. Verse 8, And all these are the beginning of sorrows. Verse 9, Then shall they deliver you up to be afflicted, and shall kill you, and you shall be hated of all nations for my name's sake. Verse 10, And then shall many be offended, and shall betray one another, and shall hate one another. In verse 11, And many false prophets shall arise, and shall deceive many. In verse 12, And because iniquity shall abound, love of many shall wax cold. In verse 14, But he that shall endure unto the end, the same shall be saved. Verse 14, And this gospel of the kingdom shall be preached into all the world for a witness unto all nations, and then the end shall come. Okay, Matthew chapter 24 and verse 5. For many shall come in my name, saying, I am Christ, and shall deceive many. Was it happen in between 31 AD, the death of Christ, going to 70 AD? Is there false Christ during this time? Let's go to the passage. We will read the book of history, the book of Ellen White, and the book of the Bible. Herein, in Acts chapter, let's read first the Bible, Acts chapter 5, in verse 36 to 37. Acts chapter 5, in verse 36 to 37. It says here, For before these days rose up Theudas, boasting himself to be somebody, to whom a number of men, about 400, joined himself, whom was slain. And all, as many as obeyed him, were scattered and brought to naught. So, in verse 37, After this man rose up Judas of Galilee, and the days of the taxing, and draw away much people after him. He also perished, and all, even as many as obeyed him, were dispersed. Let's go to Acts chapter 8 in verse 9 to 10. Acts chapter 8 in verse 9 to 10. But there was a certain man called Simon, which before time in the same city used sorcery, and bewitched the people of Samaria, giving out that himself was some great one, to whom they all gave heed, from the least to the greatest, saying, This man is the great power of God. Here are three false Christs mentioned in the book of Acts. First is Theudas. Second, Judas of Galilee. And third, Simon. So, the Bible proves to us, according to the Acts, that there was a false Christ during this time in between 31 AD and 70 AD. Let's go to the writings of Ellen White in the Desire of Ages, page 628. Desire of Ages, page 628. Many false Messiah will appear, claiming to work miracles and declaring that the time of the deliverance of the Jewish nation has come. So the false Messiah. This will mislead many. Christ's words were fulfilled. between his death and the siege of Jerusalem, many false Messiah appeared. So between his death at 31 AD and the siege of the Jerusalem, that is 70 AD, Ellen White wrote, many false Messiah appeared. Let's go to the book of the history written by Flavius Josephus. By the way, my friends, Flavius Josephus is the historian born on 37 AD. He witnessed the destruction of the Jerusalem. He said in his book, the Wars and the Antiquities of the Jews, concerning false Christ. He said, moreover, impostors and deceivers called upon the mob to follow them into the desert. For they said that they would show them unmistakable marvels and signs that will be wrought in harmony with God's design. He said, there was impostors. And Antiquities of the Jews, page 20, just here. In Judea, matters were constantly going from bad to worse, for the country was again infested with bands of brigands and impostors who deceived the mob. So the book of Acts, the book of Ellen White, and the book of Josephus, the history, are proof that there was a false Christ in between 31 AD, the destruction of Jerusalem, 31 AD, the death of Christ, and the destruction of Jerusalem at the year 70 AD. Let's go back to Matthew chapter 24. Matthew chapter 24, another second event. First is, for many shall come in my name saying, I am Christ. That is the false Christ. Verse 6, and you shall hear of wars and rumors of wars. So the second event, great events that happened between 31 AD to 70 AD are were wars and rumors of wars. Is that going to happen? The answer is yes. Let's go to the Desire of Ages, page 6 to 8. Desire of Ages, page 6 to 8. Prior to the destruction of the Jerusalem, prior 70 AD, men wrestled for the supremacy. Emperors were murderers. Those supposed to be standing next to the throne were slain. There were wars and rumors of wars. Okay? The wars of the Jews against the Samaritan, the wars of the Jews against Alexandrian, and the wars of the Jews against Ascalonians. All of this passage prove to us that there was wars and rumors of wars in between 31 AD and 70 AD. Another events in verse 7. For nations shall rise against nations and kingdoms against kingdom, and there shall be famines. Is there a famines in between 31 AD and 70 AD? The answer is yes. Let's go to the book of Acts. Before we read the book of history and also the book of Ellen White, we read first the book of Acts. The book of Acts will prove that there was a famine in between 31 AD, the death of Christ, and the destruction of the Jerusalem at 70 AD. Acts chapter 11 verse 28, it says here, and there stood up one of them named Agabus, and signified by the Spirit that there should be great dearth throughout all the world, which came to pass in the days of Claudius Caesar. So the great dearth or famine. Okay, that's mentioned in the book of Acts. Let's go to the book of Ellen White, The Great Controversy, page 32. 1,000 perished from famines and pestilence. Natural affection seems to have destroyed. Husbands robbed their wives, and wives their husbands. Children would be seen snatching the food from the mouths of their aged parents. And you can read it in the Bible in Deuteronomy chapter 28 and verse 56 and verse 57 and 57, in Lamentation chapter 4 and verse 10, This passage is a prophecy concerning the destruction or before the destruction of the Jerusalem about the famines that will happen. Okay, the great controversy tells us that there was famine before 70 AD, destruction of the Jerusalem. Let's go to the book, The Wars of the Jews, by Flavius Josephus, in volume 1, 193. It says here, in the meantime, countless thousands of Jews died for hunger. Thousands of Jews died for hunger. In every house where there was the least morsel of food, relative fought over its gaping with hunger. The outlaws prowl around like mad dogs, knowing at anything, belts, shoes, even the leather from their shields. Others divorced whips of hay. And then there was the incredible horrors of Mary Pietosiba, Wars of the Jews, Volume 1, 1 and 3. Again, great controversy, page 31. So first were the pangs of hunger, that men would know the leaders of their belts in sandals and the coverings of their shield. Great number of people should steal out night to gather wild plants growing outside the city walls, though many were sieged and put to death with cruel torture, and often those who returned in safety were robbed of what they had agreed at so great peril. Great controversy, page 81. There was a great famine in between 31 AD and 70 AD, the destruction of the Jerusalem. Let's go to another event. Verse 7. For nations shall rise against nation, and kingdoms against kingdom. And there shall be famines, pestilence. Okay? Another event is pestilence. Acts chapter 24 and verse 5. Let's go to Acts chapter 24 and verse 5. By the way, my friends, Acts, the book of Acts written by Luke, is a record of the Acts of the Apostle that existed in between 31 AD and 70 AD, the destruction of the Jerusalem. So, the first, another event is pestilence. Acts chapter 24 and verse 5. 24 in verse 5. For we have found this man a pestilent fellow, and a mover of sedition among all the Jews throughout the world, and the ringleader of the sect of Nazarenes. So, Book of Acts proved to us that there was pestilence that happened in the time before the destruction of the Jerusalem. Let's go to the Desire of Ages, page 32. Desire of Ages, page 32. 1,000 perished from famines and pestilence. So Jesus, as Ellen White wrote, that there was famines before the destruction of the Jerusalem. Okay, another event in Matthew chapter 24, verse 7. And there shall be famines and pestilence and earthquakes in diverse places. See, in earthquakes in the diverse places. Was there an earthquake before 70 AD? The answer is yes. According to Roman historian Tacitus, in his annals, in his books, in his annals, okay, if Josephus is the Jewish historian, Tacitus is the Roman historian. Let us read his book in his annals. It says here, houses were flattened by repeated earthquakes, and his terror spread the weak were trampled to death by the panic-stricken. So, the historian Tacitus tells us that there was an earthquake before 70 AD, the destruction of the Jerusalem. Let's go to the Ellicott's Commentary, Volume 6, page 146. Ellicott's Commentary, Volume 6, page 146. It says here, perhaps no period in the world has ever been so marked by the convulsion. What is convulsion? Earthquakes. As that which intervenes between the crucifixion that is 31 AD, and the destruction of the Jerusalem, that is 70 AD. Let's go to the books, The Wars of the Jews by Flavius Josephus again. These things were a manifest indication that some destruction was coming upon men, when the system of the world was put into these disorders, and anyone would guess that these wonders foreshadow some grand calamities that were coming. So the history books in the book of Ellen White prove that there was an earthquake happen before the 70 AD, the destruction of the Jerusalem. Mark chapter 13 and verse 8. The couple verse of Matthew chapter 24 and verse 7. Here is an additional details written by Mark that are not found in the book of Matthew chapter 24, but else a couple of verse. Let's go to Mark chapter 13. Mark chapter 13 in verse 8. It says here, "For nation shall rise against nation, in kingdoms against kingdom, and there shall be earthquakes in the diverse places, and there shall be famines." Notice, and troubles. The word troubles you cannot find in the couple of verse in Matthew chapter 24 and verse 7. The trouble means social unrest. Social unrest. Let's go to the great controversy. If it was happened before the destruction of the Jerusalem, let us read the great controversy, page 28. Great controversy, page 28. They become satanic in their cruelty, in the family and in the nation, among the highest and the lowest classes alike. There was a suspicion, envy, hatred, strife, rebellion, murder. There was no safety anywhere. Friends and kindred betray one to another. Parents slow their children, and children their parents. Great controversy, page 28. So Ellen White wrote that there was a social unrest during or before 70 AD, the destruction of the Jerusalem. Let's go back to Matthew chapter 24 and verse 9. Another events. Then shall they deliver you up to be afflicted and kill you, and you shall be hated of all nations for my name's sake. So another event is the persecution of the Christian. Acts chapter 5 and verse 41, Acts chapter 7 and verse 59, it talks about the killing of Stephen. In Acts chapter 8 and verse 1, Acts chapter 9 and verse 4, the persecution of the Christian. In John chapter 16 and verse 1 and verse 2. Okay? And according to Tacitus in his Annals, page 15, first Nero has self-acknowledged Christian and arrested them on their information. Large number of others were condemned. Condemned to what? Condemned to death. See? So, during the first century, before 70 AD, many or several Christians were slain because of the terrors of the emperors. So, it was happened? Yes. Before 70 AD, the destruction of the Jerusalem, many Christians were murdered in the hands of the Roman Empire. So, the prophecy of of Jesus Christ in Matthew chapter 24 verse 9 was fulfilled. Then shall they deliver you up, is to be afflicted, and shall kill you, and you shall be hated of all nations for my name's sake. Let's go to another additional details again in Mark chapter 13 in verse 9. Mark chapter 13 in verse 9, a couple of verses. Let's go back. A while ago, we read chapter 13 in verse 8. This time, we'll read chapter 13 in verse 9. But take heed to yourself, for they shall deliver you up to the council, and in the synagogue, and you shall be beaten, and you shall be brought before the rulers and kings of for my sake, for the testimony against them. So the Christian was delivered to the council, delivered to the rulers and kings. See? So, Acts chapter 26 and verse 1 to 3. This text proved to us that the people of God, especially St. Paul, was delivered to the council, or was delivered to the rulers, the kings and rulers. Okay, 26 and verse 1 to 3. Then Agrippa, this is the king, said unto Paul, Thou art permitted to speak for thyself. Then Paul stretched forth the hands and answered for himself, I think myself happy, King Agrippa, because I shall answer for myself this day before thee, touching all the things whereof I am accused of the Jews, and especially because I know thee to be expert in all custom and question, which are among the Jews, wherefore I beseech thee to hear me patiently. So St. Paul was delivered to the council. The book of Acts prove to this event. So this event was fulfilled from before 70 AD, the destruction of the Jerusalem. Let's go back to Matthew chapter 24 and verse 10. And then shall many be offended, and shall betray one another, and shall hate one another. Wow! The betrayal from relatives. Another event that takes place before the destruction of the Jerusalem, the betrayals from relatives. Okay? Let's go to the Desire of Ages. The fulfillment of this prophecy. The Desire of Ages, page 6 to 9. Fathers and mothers betray their children. Children betray their parents. Friends deliver their friends up to the Sanhedrin. The persecutors wrought out their purpose by killing Stephen, James, and other Christians. So, this event was fulfilled in between 31 AD and 70 AD, the destruction of the Jerusalem. That parents and children betrayed one another. That was happened, my beloved brothers and sisters in Christ. So let's go to another event in verse 11. And many false prophets shall arise and shall deceive many. Many false prophets will arise and shall deceive what? Many. Okay? Again, let's go to the great controversy, the Desire of Ages, page 632. Is there false prophets before the destruction of the Jerusalem? The answer is yes. Let's go to the Desire of Ages, page 631. False prophets did rise, deceiving the people and leading great numbers into the desert. Magicians and sorcerers, claiming miraculously power, draw the people after them and the mountain solitude. That is the Desire of Ages, page 631. And the great controversy, page 229, the religious leaders troubled false prophets to proclaim, even while Roman legions were besieging the temple, that the people were to wait for the deliverance from God. So these false prophets says, no, we are protected by God. That just came down. Don't worry, we are protected by God. No, that's the message of the false prophets. But they do not know that during the 70 AD, the destruction of Jerusalem was occurred. Let's go to Flavius Josephus, Wars of the Jews, page 6. It says here, now it came to pass, while Fredus was procurator in Judea, that a certain magician, whose name was Judas, persuaded a great parts of the people to take their effects with them, and followed him to the river Jordan, for he told them he was a prophet. Oh, he told Judas, told that he was a prophet, and that he would, by his own command, divide the river and afford them passed over it. And many were deluded by his word. That is the works of the books of Flavius Josephus, Wars of the Jew, page 6. And false believers will rise. Okay? So let's go to verse 12. And because iniquity shall abound, the love of many shall wax cold. But, verse 13, but he that shall endure unto the end, the same shall be saved. He that endure unto the end, the same shall be saved. So, the word endure or endurance, it means experience a great struggle. Who experience a great struggle and who can endure unto the end, the same shall be saved. And verse 14, another events here that are fulfilled before 70 AD is the proclamation, was the proclamation of the gospel. In verse 14, and this gospel of the kingdom shall be preached into all the world for a witness unto all nations, and then shall the end come. Is this prophecy fulfilled before 70 AD, the destruction of Jerusalem? Yes. Yes. The gospel of the kingdom was preached to all Roman Empire. To all Roman Empire. Colossians chapter 1 and verse 23. Colossians chapter 1 and verse 23. It says here, if you continue in the faith grounded and settled, and be not moved away from the hope of the gospel which you have heard, and which was preached to every creature which is under heaven, where I, Paul, am made a minister. So the gospel was preached every creature under the heavens before the destruction of the Jerusalem at the year 70 AD. Let's go to the book of Romans, chapter 1 and verse 8. Books of Romans, chapter 1 and verse 8, mentioned here. First, I thank my God through Jesus Christ for you all, that your faith is spoken of throughout the whole world. Wow. This prophecy, the proclamation of the gospel, was fulfilled before the destruction of the Jerusalem. Folks, these events that we have studied, false Christ, wars, famines, pestilence, earthquakes, terrible social unrest or troubles, persecution to the Christian, the Christian will deliver to the council, betrayal from relatives, false Christ will arise, and the gospel must be preached. All of these events was fulfilled in between 31 AD, that was the death of Christ, and 70 AD, the destruction of the Jerusalem. Friends, tomorrow we will study the end time fulfillment of Matthew chapter 24 verse 4 through verse 14. God bless and good evening.